decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neal.
That would make me terrible, Troy.
I'm Treacherous, Trista.
And we're joined by Scary Scott Bradley.
Nice.
Hey, everybody.
Hellbent for horror, and he's author of Screaming for Pleasure, which is right up here. How horror makes you happy and healthy, which I think is something all of us here and all of us watching can agree with.
That's wonderful. I love when I find my crowd, right? That's how I find them. If I say that and they go, yes. And I'm like, okay, here we go. But I also love talking to people who don't get it. I'm at conventions and stuff. You would be stunned how many conventions I go to, and I'll be across the hall, be like a science fiction convention, and they have their little TB wing for the horror folk. And so we're on our little tables in the corner, and you'll just see these people look across and go, then they'll come walking over and they'll go, I don't like horror. It's like, you came all the way over here to tell me
Just
that.
to tell you that.
Like, just to tell me that. And it's like, great. Well, when I talk to people who love horror, they spend about 20 minutes at my booth. People who don't like horror spend about 20 minutes at my booth because everybody's passionate about it. And when you start getting to people talking about it, they realize that they have a very narrow view of what horror is. And horror is like the Nile. It's like the Nile River. You have so many tributaries, especially at this point, that it's crazy how much horror influenced the culture and how much the culture influences horror. It really is the commentary, the ultimate commentary that you've got going, and it's fun, and I don't have to worry about a horror movie killing me, but I have to worry about everything else out there.
Yeah. And I like in your book, you mentioned it too, about horror is very diverse. And sometimes I see people online will fight over something's horror or not, but like you said, it could be comedic, it could be dramatic, it could be just blood and guts. There's all different types.
Yeah. My new thing that I say now is that horror is Frank's Red Hot sauce. You can put it on anything and it just builds it right up. It's a perfect mixing thing.
Yeah. And I liked how that kind of tied into later in the book when you talked about how sometimes they'll try to hide that something's horror when it starts to get up for Oscars.
Oh God, yeah. That's my big horror thing. I have a show that I've done called My Horror Manifesto. My big thing is horror does not deserve your shame, and it's like horror affects all sorts of different forms of genre. The reason it's so cool is that it has allegory and metaphor built right into it. It's handmade to be able to speak about things that we're uncomfortable about without smelling like burning tires. Like, I might not want to watch a drama ever about the insurrection, but I may watch vampires attack the Congress and stuff. I could go for that. And I think that it happens a lot where people just don't like horror fans, I think. And they don't like the neighbors that there are. If you're someone who loves a horror movie, you go, but now I have to admit that I like Friday the 13th. No, I don't want that. And so they come up with these different ways to make these. It's a little bit like what George Carlin said about war, where he said in World War I, it was shell shock. Two syllables, and it told you all about what it was like to get into war and bombs going off. And then they put battle fatigue, an extra synonym there. And what that does is it gets you further and further away from the danger. Battle fatigue just sounds like you're tired now. It's not like bombs going off. And then in the end, he goes post-traumatic stress syndrome. We have so many syllables in there that it no longer, we're so far away from the horror that it no longer matters. And I think that you have that happen with genre labeling. I hate labels. I think Poison needs to be labeled. Other than that, I think everything else, it really is a limiter.
That's a good outlook. Yeah.
I mentioned a million times, I've had like arguments with people on social media when they'll get mad, like, Predator, they'll say isn't a horror movie, it's action. It's like, well, yeah, it's all those things. Well, why is it? I mean, it's about an alien who's killing people one by one. Right. It's pretty horrific.
Right. Why can't you say horror? What's the problem with saying horror? And my thing is that they think that it's low class, that it's for mouth breathers, that it goes for lowest common denominator. And my thing is, horror has a specific purpose. Right? It's not here to share your half a sandwich with you at recess. It is the place that we go to remove some of that shadow that we got in us. Everybody has this dark side. We get to have a safe handshake with it. And I always like that Jungian thing where he basically says, You can ignore that shadow self at your own peril. And you see people who ignore it. It's like right now we've got 2 celebrities on trial for weeks because they didn't work on that shadow self. And all of a sudden it comes to the forefront. You've got politicians, all sorts of people who get on TMZ because they're just not looking at that part that they need to feed. And then it's like a spoiled brat comes up, makes all this big mess in your life. But it's also a thing of I find my tribe. I also find that I have a sense of humor about things, because you got to look at this stuff with a certain amount of tongue in cheek. I mean, we're laughing at the things that make us scared. I think that horror allows me to survive things that I may not want to ever be in. I think comedy and horror are kind of the same in some ways, only some. I don't want to get into trouble with my stand-up comedian friends. They'll kill me if I say they're the same. But the thing that they do have in common is they both love surprise. They live and die on whether they can surprise you. But that surprise either gives you a laugh or a scream. And comedy is like watching someone do things that you could never get away with and get a vicarious pleasure from that. And horror is you get to watch people endure things that you never want to go through, but have a vicarious pleasure in that. And I think on the other side, it makes you feel a little bit better. But people have a real hard on about, sorry about that. We're good with
yeah, you can say whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So try not to be too, I'm surrounded by all these Massachusetts guys. That's got to do it. The East Coast is coming through.
Yeah.
But
that Northeast thing happens.
Yeah. Northeast is right. So, for me, I think that people have an issue with labeling or horror in and of itself because of what it works on, those sordid things. But to me, it's an important part of us. I don't think horror should be used for other things. Stay out of horror's way and say that it's bad. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. It's how you deal with an emotion that I think is so important. So I may regale a little bit too much in the dark side, but at the same point, I don't become my dark side. In fact, most people that I know that I go to conventions, they're happy people. They had a pretty miserable first act in their life, but their second act is pretty freaking cool. They're having a great time. And they don't get it. The folks that need to change the stuff, basically what they want to do is anytime there's a movie like The Shining or The Witch or It Follows or anything that's really like The Cursed even, which I thought was really good. These movies, they'll call them something else once they start getting those little golden statues attached.
Elevated horror, or they're
oh my God! Throw people off the elevated horror. Go to the top floor and throw them off the elevated horror. I hate that because to me, that's one of the problems that we have too as horror fans. We're just as bad as the critics because we sit there and say, "Well, that's not real horror because it didn't scare me." And it's like, guys, we got to unify. It's all horror, and it's so general, so broad. What scares me may not scare you. What scares you might put me in a coma. I have no idea. And so it's not the same. It's not really about being scared. It's about being surprised. It's about being engrossed. It's about losing ourselves in that imagination. It's allowing ourselves to go into that dark, the forest that you hear in the hero's journey. Horror is the forest. Horror is the dark forest, and we all need to go through it at some point. And some of us we're ready for it a little bit better than others, and that's fine if you don't like it. But please don't change it into a thriller because you like the movie. And to me, it's like if you change the genre every time that there's an exceptional horror film, that means there are never any exceptional horror films. You're removing anything that you consider classy so that you keep us in the grotto, right? In the slums. And to me, that's the real problem that I see with it. So anyway, as you can tell, I can just wax on and on.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I just want to add, I thought a good combination about comedy and horror too, where they're the best movies I think to watch with a group of people.
Oh God,
there's some interaction there.
Yeah, I love it.
Bring a lot of people in.
Yeah. You can share in the experience.
Yeah, exquisite stuff. I mean, there's some of the great ones are like Return of the Living Dead, which I think most people consider a classic. But I think even Turkeys can be great. One of the things that I think is really interesting about genre fans, there aren't a bunch of people who are drama fans that get together and go, we got to watch Jiggly. We got to watch Bonfire of the Vanities.
Yeah, like a rom-com convention.
Yeah, there's no rom-com convention, and they don't watch tepid to really bad dramas. It's like they don't get together and go, wow. Yeah. We don't do they don't do that, but genre fans, we do. We are somehow connected to the element of surprise, but it's also very DIY. What I think we get is that the people who are making these, for the most part, there are some cynical folk, but the people who are making these things are us. It's like punk rock. People just jumped up on the stage, grabbed the guitars and fucked up for a year until they figured out how to play them, and we supported them. And it was that whole thing of you or me, I am you, you're speaking my language. And it's a universal language that I think really makes it so that we can watch the turkeys. And yeah, there are people who mock them. Like, I don't like the Medved brothers and the Golden Turkey thing. I think that they were being snide. But I get together with friends, and they're doing it this weekend. I'm not going to be able to make it, but Turkey Day in May, 6 movies that are just really howlers, that are horror movies. You know, like we watched, what was the one that I love? Blood Freak. Have you ever seen Blood Freak with the guy who smokes pot and then he gets a turkey head and goes around murdering people?
Blood Freak. No.
Amazing.
No, I don't
amazing.
think I've seen that one either.
Oh, you must see it. It's so great. And when you watch the end, think of me. but it is, it's fun, it's enjoyable, and we relish in the fact that it may be, you know, silly and stuff like that, but we empathize more than we do mock. And I think that's something that we have, that we want to see everything. We're so excited by the ability to be able to be surprised one more time. And that's where I'm going now, because I've had so many fucking arguments with people about, oh, that's not scary, that's not a horror movie because it didn't make me jump once. Personal Shopper, not a horror movie. I'm like, think about what's in that movie. Yeah, and you'll see, yeah, it's not your traditional horror film in the way that if you're looking at this, but M.R. James was writing ghost stories a century ago that were just like that. And so that's part of our genetics, and that's fine if you don't like it, but please stop saying it's not horror. So for me now, not scary doesn't matter. It's really, are you surprised? Do you feel that dread? Do you feel that uneasiness? Do you feel that suspense? Because I don't even know what a thriller is. Does anybody know what the definition of thriller is?
Yeah, I've never really understood that one either.
Yeah. So it's great to have it, I guess, but you know, they can keep some of it. But there are other things that I think, horror is the only one that's actually an emotion, right? It's the only genre that's named after an emotion, and yet it gets knocked all the time.
Andrew brings up, he just throws out his personal favorite comedy horror is Street Trash, which is a very
yeah. Fuck. Boy, did that movie bother me when I first saw it. I mean, I was mad. I saw that back in the 80s when it came out, and the director bought a Steadicam. So he was in like School of Visual Arts at the time. And oh my God, what's his name? He did Document of the Dead.
I just want to throw out real quick too. Ryan Kruger was on the show, did Fried Berry. He's actually right now at cons pitching a remake of Street Trash.
Really? Oh my God.
Nice.
I don't even know what that would look like. I mean, that's like, I mean, it's what I love about Street Trash is that it's so cruel and hilarious. Like, that's a cruel movie. That's a down the river Manhattan movie, right?
Like you were saying earlier, it actually has a lot of social commentary too. It's actually, talking about things, within this gross out, horror.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the effects are fantastic for a small movie like that. And yeah, he bought a Steadicam and said, "Fine." Ray Frumkes, that was it. Roy Frumkes was his teacher, who also did Document of the Dead, the documentary. And he said, "Go ahead, kid." So they gave him some money, and he made Street Trash instead of doing whatever he was doing in school. So to have a teacher who says, "Listen, you might get a screenplay out of this. It's SVA for the same amount of money that you buy this Steadicam." And now Muro doesn't do horror anymore, but he's a Steadicam operator. I think he won for Dances with Wolves. He did the Steadicam work in there for the Buffalo thing. So he's got an entire cottage industry that he's got going on that. But Street Trash is where we know him. It's like Sam Raimi. We know where we know you from.
Yeah, or Peter Jackson. Yeah,
Peter Jackson. Oh, so you tell me, what was it like when you first saw Bad Taste? When did you see Bad Taste first off?
Well, when I was pretty young, got it from the VH store. My favorite was Dead Alive.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Dead Alive's amazing.
Really, we had the main guy from Dead Alive on the show a couple times.
Oh, really?
And he told me that
nice guy.
That Peter Jackson always wanted to make the sequel because he loves it. And so I was like, "What the hell? I'm going to see if he'll come on the show." So I contacted him, and he was I didn't think I'd even get a reply, but I got a reply that he was interested, but he's currently making King Kong, and I was like, oh, okay.
Oh wow. Well, there we go.
Got a little movie I'm working on.
Yeah. He's something else. There are directors that that they kind of got saddled with horror and they're a little bit grumpy about it, but they've aligned themselves with it. But then there's the guys that are just like, they've been fans forever, and Jackson's just one of those. I love that he's insanely talented and just tasteless, and he has so much taste at the same time. So he can go all over. It's why I love Del Toro. I say that Del Toro, if he didn't exist, we'd have to invent him, because he's like everything that I wanted to ascribe to, but he did it. And I think that it's amazing that what I love about him is kind of like what I loved about Harlan Ellison. They're really smart guys. They're not afraid to be smart, and they're not afraid to love what they love. And, if you're my age, you spent a lot of time going like this, getting, picked on because you were believing in this silly stuff all this time. And I also grew up at a time when critics were everything, and critics said that the movies will change the world. I'm like, great, let's talk horror movies. Like, not those. What are you talking about?
I grew up watching, Siskel and Ebert, and I still enjoyed them. And I found out about a bunch of movies I probably wouldn't have found out otherwise. But they're actually kind of made me laugh how mad they would get at horror movies. Like, they would take them really personally.
Oh, yeah.
Like Friday 13th Part 4, he was saying, like young people grow up and think this is how the world is. And I was like, who the hell is going to watch Friday 13th Part 4 and think this is how life is?
My favorite was the review that he did for it's one of my favorites, but it was Night of the Living Dead. So I think it was for Reader's Digest at the time. He was doing articles for Reader's Digest. People forget that was a movie that came out during a time when horror movies were considered greasy kid stuff. So Vincent Price and stuff, they were Saturday morning matinees. They would show cartoons and stuff, and then they would show the movies. They showed Night of the Living Dead at a Saturday matinee in Manhattan, and there was like a kiddie riot. People like, kids are going insane, not knowing what they're looking at. Naked women running around and people eating intestines. And so he wrote about it like it was a Vietnam, like the attack of the Tet Offensive. He's watching like something happening in Vietnam, and he was saying these kids are staggering out, and I'm like, that's funny, but what an amazing war cry. And the thing is, I think Ebert, Siskel did feel like he was, always thinking a little bit high up. But I think Ebert, he made a movie with Russ Meyer, right? He wrote some weird screenplays. I think he loved movies, and he didn't like movies that were lazy. So like Santa Sangre, when he did a whole thing on Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre, which is really a giallo slasher. He was like, this is a magnificent movie, and Jodorowsky understands that movies are so important you don't bore anybody. And so I think he was a fan. He just wasn't a fan of the glut. And I think sometimes he did, like Romero used to say that Ebert would try and say, can you put makeup on me? Can I be a zombie in the background? There were a couple guys, I forget who the other not Saris. Saris would never do that. But there were a couple critics that were like, hey, I may have trashed your last film, but I'd really like to be a zombie. So the sense of play and no bad publicity, I think sometimes Ebert did raise the stakes. But I also think he was tone deaf as well. He missed it on I Spit on Your Grave, which weirdly enough, I think it's a paradigm shift, because now many women that I know that I consider feminists, they consider themselves feminists, love that movie, the rape revenge film that movie is. They say it's a tough watch, but it's so much better than so many other films. And it's interesting how that was a movie that really kind of attacked the male gaze because of how long everything goes and what the end is like. And the reason that Maya made that film was he found a woman who was abused and took her to the police, and they didn't believe her, and it really hit him to the core. You can feel that in that movie, And I think that Ebert was pretty much into the male gaze, right? So he was like, why am I looking at this disgusting stuff? And so, I think all those guys in the long run, if you come up with a really cool thing, sometimes they fell for it. Sometimes they loved it.
Yeah, I mean, he really liked Devil's Rejects, and I think he liked Last House on the Left, which is odd, but yeah.
Strong cup of coffee right there.
Yeah. But, I did make a note, by the way, and you brought him up, Harlan Ellison. That's one of my brother's favorite people. So you guys would get along. Yeah.
Yep. Whimper of Whip Dogs. One of the best. Like horror that isn't horror.
Yeah. What was the one that I loved in Strange Wine? Croatoan.
Oh yeah, that's such a great one. There's an eerie comic, I think, that oh no, it was Rock God, which is kind of similar, but they do that in one of the old Warren magazines, and I think I can't remember who it was. It was Neal Adams. He does the illustrations. Really nice.
Yes. Oh my God! Now we're talking some great stuff. We start talking Warren magazines. Yeah. I came in at the very end of Famous Monsters when it was no longer about monsters. It was like all about Star Wars and shit. So I mean, I love Star Wars, but it's not Famous Monsters.
Yep.
And so Warren Creepy came in, and Eerie and Creepy, and those were like the magazines for me. I was like, this is really tremendous. Something else. And I mean, we're talking about horror filmmakers and stuff, and at Trista we have someone who has acted in these things. I think I always, whenever I talk to you, I wax your car about Human Race, which I think is friggin' amazing.
Thank you very much, but it's not about me. So I want to make sure I mention Shattered and Splintered, which is an anthology that you contributed to, and I know that the proceeds go to a great cause. So can you talk a little bit about that and where people can pick it up?
Sure. Let me real quick. So Shattered and Splintered is an anthology, 20 different authors doing short stories, and Stephen Graham Jones and folks like that are in there. And then there's these weird outliers like me who end up in there. And the proceeds are going to help volunteer fire departments in Colorado. Most importantly, the Glen Haven Volunteer Fire Department. So what people forget about these wildfires, of course, incredibly crazy and insane. We certainly know about them here. Is that volunteer fire departments still exist, and they live on every fireman there or fire person there is someone who has a regular job. So when they go to do a fire like a wildfire, it can take a week, 2 weeks to fight those things. They're not at work. They're not getting any kind of compensation. And those places live off of like bake sales and things. The fire departments literally at times don't have money. When I talked to the Glen Haven folk, they were saying that they were on 1-ply toilet paper, and 2 of the firefighters that they had were in turnout gear, the bunkers, the big fire bunkers that people wear, that were no longer rated. In other words, they were old and expired. So they're covered, but they're not seriously covered. The Nomex is no longer holding. I was going, that's crazy. So a friend of mine got in touch with them because they famously saved the Stanley hotel from the fire. Stanley's famous because that's where Stephen King went and sat around and got the idea for The Shining. And I can understand it after being there, walking those halls. And I got to see his place, 217, was the room he was in. And, so they saved that. It seemed like a pretty cool thing to do. We were going to the Bram Stoker Awards, and so everybody was flying in anyway to Colorado. We said, my friend, I had very little to do with it. I started writing something, but my friend was going, yeah, we're putting this thing together. Would you write for it? We're all going to show up. Everybody's going to get their day early. People can pay a little bit of money. All that goes to the charity, and we'll have some fun with this. And I was like, oh, sign me up. First off, I'm an ex-firefighter. I was a firefighter in the Air Force, so it was something near and dear to my heart. And so they had me do the introduction as well for that book. And what I'm doing now is, because I don't have it right in front of me, I'm playing for time to see if I can get the it's AEA. There it is. Shattered and Splintered. You can get it at the AEA Press.com. page. They have several books there. That's the editor. But Shattered and Splintered, anything that goes, any books that we sell, all the proceeds are going to that fire department. I think we made about $10,000 in one day for them. Nice. And it was really, really nice. We're hoping to continue to get them more and more. And in fact, we're starting to do charities. My friend, and I'm just kind of tagging along on the coattails. Anytime that we're going to be doing anything with Stoker Awards, whatever city that they're going to be in, they're going to be in Pittsburgh this upcoming year. We're going to see about putting out a collection and seeing about making money for them. And for that, it's going to be the public library system, which I don't know if you guys know this, but Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has the greatest, I think it's the best library system in America, which makes it one of the best in the world. And so you can basically make a degree for yourself, slowly but surely, using the library system. The entire area, not just Pittsburgh city proper, the entire area gets to use them. So we're doing that kind of thing. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I love that I wrote this little weird story called The Reliquarians, and I had a lot of people come over and ask me to sign the book, and that it's helping somebody else, which is nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in here in the description and on the website.
Thanks. I mean, some of the stories are great. I don't know if any of you guys know, like Vincent Bainakava. He's a bizarro horror writer. He has a story called Head on a Plate. just amazing. It is exactly what it says it is. It's snakes on a plane, but the story is laugh out loud funny. And
he's very fitting for Without Your Head on a Plate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Head on a plate. So there we go. We bring it right back around.
And also throw out there, do support your library. I'm a member of Sandwich Library here and the Boston Public Library.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do Bay Area as well, and that's another really good one because there's so many cities like Boston. I mean, my gosh, you have all those cities just racked and stacked there. So if you're all in the same system, that's really great.
Yeah. The last couple of years during the pandemic, I've listened to many audiobooks through the public library.
So have I, and that's one of the great things is that it got me reading again and listening because going insane with my own voice, very easy to do.
Yeah. So I was interested because a lot of the books you listed in your book, Screaming for Pleasure, were ones I've listened to recently, and for me personally, I think probably the best horror book I've ever. I don't know how to put this. It's the best horror book and movie combined. Is The Exorcist, where some books are way better than the movie, or very rarely, but sometimes reverse that. But that's one where I don't think you can argue the movie or the book. So it's
oh man. Yeah, that's a great choice. And I also wanted to stop and thank you for actually reading the book. It's exceedingly rare. What's the name of it? Shattered and Wacky? What's the name of your book? Yeah, I've had all sorts of things my book's been called. So having someone actually take the time to read it, that means a lot. And I think books, I'm not sure, but you can have a raise of hands. How many people saw a movie that corrupted them, a horror movie corrupted them before they read a book? Right. I mean, book is really where most of us end up getting, freaked out first because we're not allowed to go see R-rated movies. We have to sneak. But if you read, you get to go through a whole bunch of stuff. My dad was functionally illiterate, so he thought all books were homework. And so I was in a strict religious house, couldn't see a lot of things. But I got a library card, so I got Jaws. There's a nasty sex scene in there, or a hot sex scene. I was like, oh my God, books are wonderful. and so I found that I was able to read some things that I was too scared to watch. The Exorcist didn't matter. It was scary to read. It was scary to watch. Yeah. And it is one of those rare ones where, I often say that bad books make good movies, good books make bad movies. It's not absolute. But I think a lot of times there's just so much investment in a good book and so much of it, like King is really hard to adapt because 90% of the book is in here. You're the narrator. And so how do you get all those little nuances? If it's the scary monster isn't nearly what is so important in the full flavor of a King book. It's the characters and it's what the characters are going through and that inner monologue. And that just doesn't translate in a movie. And then you have some books that are like really kind of crappy and you go, wow, oh, I see what they got there. They got the nugget, which is, I think, what King used to call it in Dance Macabre.
Yeah.
And so that works. But then you have a movie and a book like The Exorcist, which is one of the times. I mean, really, Blatty was on to something that is so, and I understand maybe in a more secular world now, it may not seem as profound. But at that time, in the early 70s, when all that stuff was going on, kids revolting against their families, all the institutions are crumbling down. I mean, Rosemary's Baby kind of comments on it early, but The Exorcist really is the hammer that everybody hears hit the spike, and it really is a book that made me really nervous to even think about, and to think that it's somewhat an uplifting book in Blatty's eyes, but it may be the most venal thing. Kind of like we're going to have to talk about the sadness at some point. Kind of like the sadness, where you have a profound energy and emotion that's in the center of that film, but it is one of the more venal films that you'll see. I mean, it really goes off the rails in the decorum. I mean, you got everything that can offend somebody in that movie, and done seriously. You could see trauma turn and just clicking just a little bit, and many of those scenes would be hilarious. But they went down that path, and I think The Exorcist just had the thing I remember, and you probably remember this too. The first page has nothing to do with the story. You open it up, it's like an FBI informant being tortured, Vietnam priests, getting their ears, they're flayed, and the kids get chopsticks in their ears. All these atrocities just listed. And then it goes, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. You're like, what the fuck? Yeah, you're immediately off guard, and you're immediately disturbed. And the nature of evil. I mean, can you have a bigger story, a broader, more profound thing to talk about in horror than the nature of evil? So, I mean, if Blatty never did anything else, he made a book that truly spoke for the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned.
And I like that the evil in it is really evil. It's not like something you're gonna like laugh at, or there's like there's no real redeeming. There's no redeeming value to it.
Oh yeah, and the book is so. I mean, the movie itself, I mean, just the visual images. I mean, everybody talks about movies that can't be made now. I'm pretty sure there are scenes that would have to be cut from The Exorcist just because of the sordidness of it, that there's so many blasphemous things happening all at once. But the book's far worse. I mean, the book to me was what's amazing about the book versus the movie is how much of an endurance test it is. So the movie encapsulates it like they had one night to have to deal with this thing. But in the book, it goes on for weeks, if I remember correctly. And every time they get close to saving her, the beast just slows her heart down to where she's going to die. And they have to let it stay in her. And so it's like this horrible, horrible, torturous thing. It's a constant return.
That makes the end even worse, because you think there's really, even though it's out of her, how does she recover? You think the body's just ravished at this point.
Yeah, you get Exorcist 2. That's what happens.
That shouldn't happen to anybody.
There are people who are reassessing that movie.
I need to rewatch. I haven't watched. I
haven't seen it in years either.
Yeah, as much as I love John Borman, when I first saw it, I was like, oh well, maybe if I close one eye.
Before we get to the sadness, Trista, do you have another question?
I do, yeah. Screaming for Pleasure, you talk about fighting your phobias with horror, and I'd like to know more about some of your fears or phobias and how that applies to you.
Oh boy, that's a great one. Thanks again for reading. But the phobias, that chapter almost didn't make it. When I had my content editor, they wrote back and they said, if you want to get sued, keep this in the book. I was like, what? And they said, you're making fun out of phobias, and somebody's I'm like, okay, so how about if I put a little caveat in there that I am not a physician, and I am not telling you to get off your meds. This is purely for fun. They're like, okay, that sounds great. I'm like, God damn, you gotta be kidding me. But there's my big fear for the longest time. There's two. One is spiders. So when I was a kid, I was helping a tree surgeon work on this big oak tree that was up against a stone wall with ivy on it. And so I was a skinny little kid, and I was only 12 years old. He said, I'll give you $30 to take this rope and go around and loop it and everything, and I'll tie it off. I'm like, okay, that sounds like fun. And I'm wearing a Levi Strauss jeans jacket and jeans and all that stuff. And so I take the rope and I'm going through and I get to the other side and I'm itching like crazy. I'm like, what in the heck? I look head to toe, daddy long legs, just bouncing all over me and going over my face. And he said that I just went right down. I don't remember. I don't remember at all. And all I know is that from then on, I had this real fear of spiders. And it was like they knew, like I could be with anybody. And the spider would be there and go, and look right at me and hop. And so it was like this constant terror. I saw like invasion, worst horror movies, right? I mean, Kingdom of the Spiders, you know, stuff like that. In what was it, Invasion of the Spiders, I want to say Spider People. It's not. It's the one with the giant spiders, giant spider invasion. That's what it was.
Oh, okay.
So that movie, when they had the tarantula fall into the blender while she's making some kind of smoothie and she drinks it, I'm like, there you go, we're doomed. So that really got me. And now what ended up happening is I moved to the West Coast and I was near where Mount Diablo in the San Francisco Bay Area is where all the tarantulas come to mate. So I went up there and you're just watching this, dun, 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 and all of a sudden it was like, okay, they're not that bad. Tarantulas for some weird reason in a huge amount. And also buying a house. When you realize that spiders eat termites and stuff, you start getting a little bit better about them. And it was really a meme that changed. It was that meme that had like the 4 squares of a close-up of a spider, and it's going, hey, I just ate all the termites over here. Oh, thank you. I'd love to read a newspaper, you know, stuff like that, where it's actually killing the spiders. And I was like, you know, that's funny. And so it got me out of it. The other one is demons. So when I was a kid, my family was in a cult that believed that the world was going to end in 1975. And one of the big things was that they believed that demons were right here, tempting you the whole time. And all they wanted to do was possess you. And that possession was really easy. And so I'd be at church and people would be like, oh, yeah, I was on the bus the other day and there was a demon there. I looked over, he had no eyes. Nobody else noticed, but I saw that he had no eyes. And I was like, so I'm like 8. Hearing this stuff about people coming at you in the park with their hands extended, you know, asking you to come play. They're strangers. And so they were always saying that this was real. And they believed very much in idolatry. So anything like if you ate too much McDonald's, you the sacred M, whatever it fucking might be. It was crazy as batshit, but it was what I lived with. And so demons were very real, which is why The Exorcist was so scary. When I finally said, I'm going to read this at night and see what happens. So I got over this kind of thing, but it's kind of like vestigial deep down. There's this genetic thing that was put in me that I still believe in them in some weird way, even though I could tell you a million times, all I need is one really scary thing to happen that I can't explain. My brain immediately goes back to the old terror. It's like THC in the fat cells. It's like it just every so often burns and comes up. And I had that happen a few times in my life. One, the most intense one I had in a long time was seeing the original Paranormal Activity. Sight unseen, not knowing what it was. Going in to see that. And it was like literally because it was pure cinema. They just put a camera there and your eyes are just scanning the entire thing the whole time. But it was exactly like my fears. You know, it wasn't like I was going to see a pitchfork thing. It wasn't going to be anything big. It was going to be something that was a predator and I was the prey. And it loved stalking me and it loved making me scared. And it loved making it so that nobody would believe me. And those were all those crazy things that I had about demons. So at the moment when it's day, night, and I'm freaking out over the nighttime, then they switch it up and she's like sitting there in the broad daylight and she goes, it's right next to me and her hair blows. And that's when I kind of went into like, oh my God, what's happening here? I had a real quick moment of anxiety and I had to laugh it off, but I went home scared. So I had to put in Drag Me to Hell to allow myself to get back into the humor of it all. But I walked around the house going, this is crazy. I'm an adult. I make a living at this stuff. I don't believe in this stuff. Why am I scared? And it's like, man, when the phobia is in you, it is in you. And so that's one of the reasons that I also had that caveat, is that I love talking about how people can get claustrophobic watching Jaws and watching Alien. Because as broad as the ocean is, as expansive as the outer space is, it's this big too. You're in this little ship and everything else kills you. And so you can see forever. When you can't see the exit sign in a room, that's when it's big. And that's when it's also this feeling of claustrophobia. It's like reverse claustrophobia. I have no idea how to get out of here. You may as well have a bunch of blankets tying me up. So I love talking about that kind of thing in the book and on podcasts occasionally.
So what movie would you say you said Paranormal Activity, but what movie would you say, in your opinion, not the scariest, but deals the best with demons?
Ooh, The Entity. Have you ever seen Barbara Hershey in The Entity?
Yeah.
There's something really so unnerving about that, because there are moments when I think the thing that scares me the most is the banality of it all, right? It's not like you're going to be in a haunted castle, or you're even going to read some kind of sacred rune you're not supposed to, and you invite a demon. It's the idea that she's in her house, she's brushing her hair in front of a mirror, and all of a sudden she just feels something weird, and she gets punched right in the face, sees nothing. And how disorienting and scary would that be? And then suddenly being picked up and moved and violated. I can't even think of how horrifying that would be. But in that movie, it doesn't say anything. It's this malevolent evil that's just there existing, and seems to relish in her terror and relish in making her seem insane. Like that's the real fun, is driving you mad. And so there's a scene in there where they're having a birthday party for the younger child, and everything's fun. It's broad daylight. They're in their kitchen. Everybody's laughing. And she walks to go get a knife to cut the cake, and she bounces into something, and she's just like, boom. Up till then, kids don't see anything. Nobody sees anything. It's at night, but she runs right. It's like it wants to just stand in front of her and say, this is going to be so fun. I can't wait to taste this exquisite terror. And so when it hits, she's just hit like that. And the look in her eyes, it doesn't have to be any bigger than that. Of course, it does get bigger because it's a movie, but that moment right there is what I think really is the scary idea of, if there are demons, you are stalked by your own personal hell. You don't have to go to hell. You have this thing which is allowing you a taste of it at that moment. And I think that movie probably does it better than like The Conjuring and stuff like that, even though I love those movies for what they are. And I think James Wan is an underrated director for how he puts scenes together. His suspense scenes are really exquisite. But I think that really simple thing of, you're in your house and all of a sudden the toaster just raises up and drops down, and you're just like, this doesn't compute. Cognitive dissonance. I'm at a loss. How would you work with that, Trista? Because you're an actress. If you had that kind of thing that you were asked to do, where do you go?
It actually was reminding me a little bit of Echoes of Fear, because I think Brian Avenay Bradley and Lo Avenay Bradley are really masterful at those subtleties, because just like you were saying with King's work, it's the subtleties that lure you in. It's the subtleties that, like, King's books are my best friends, and then it's even more painful when the horror happens.
Yeah, I love it, because that's a great movie too. Echoes of Fear is like, when I first saw it, I saw it at a film festival. And you're at a film festival, everybody's jaded. We've seen a million of these movies, and a lot of them are well shot, have decent stories, but timing isn't at that exquisite professionalism yet. And so we don't jump very often. And there were two really strong jumps in that movie where I watched a very jaded film festival crowd hop back one set of seats, because it was just amazing. And you scared the shit out of me in the movie. I thought you were seriously in trouble.
I had the same experience seeing it for the first time as before I even knew Trista was at a film festival, and it was the same way. A bunch of horror fans, and we all jumped from the movie.
Yeah, we're all laughing. We're all like, it's just another film festival thing. Thank God I have this really big pile of popcorn in my hand.
Yeah. And also the jump scare, a lot of times that's the end, but it actually keeps going for a bit. You don't see very often.
Yeah, there was a lot in that movie that I really like. I love both of the co-directors because they really, I think that was their house, but they did such a great, and maybe that's why their sense of space was so good. A lot of horror movies that you watch, you're like, I have no clue how many rooms there are in this house at this point. There must be 40 rooms in this house. But this one, I had an understanding of where everything was. And that made it even creepier when there was a new room, when we're suddenly underneath the house. And you're like, geez, this is... So the sense of place, making sure that that's firm. It's like what Savini used to do. Before you use the fake axe, smack it against some real wood. Have a real one that you smack against the wood, so when it chips, people are remembering the chip, and then they're like, oh wow, he's just stuck that in a guy's head. And I think if you set up the building, when you start making it where you're going in places that aren't supposed to be there, it works. It's like The Changeling was another one, George C. Scott, where that attic is like, and what was the one, Sixth Sense, I guess, where it was the door that was hidden behind that stuff is fucking awesome.
Does Troy have his tortoise?
I do. Hal wanted to say hello.
Hi, Hal. How are you?
I said last time that I would bring Hal on, and
what a sweetheart.
To say hello.
Hi,
how old?
She's 6, I think. 6?
Oh my gosh, that's like 10 seconds.
I know, exactly.
It's gonna outlive the Union, that turtle.
I don't want to get dark, but when Troy and B got the tortoise, they had to will it to someone because it will.
Oh geez, yeah, I'll bet.
The nephews now, they're like, how long do you think you're gonna live, Uncle Troy? Well, don't push me along too far, but you guys will have plenty of time with her.
Yeah, I remember, what was it? I think it was Conan O'Brien used to have a bit that he did in the year 2000.
Oh yeah,
and one of them goes, in the year 2000, turtles will live to 100 years.
That was one of my favorite bits, and then I loved that they kept doing it long after the year 2000.
Yes. What a great
I used
idea.
to be able to do how I did on the show, but I can't get my voice that high anymore.
So I guess, Troy, you have an animal there. One of the subgenres of horror is animals attack. Do you have any favorites in that?
Interesting. Troy, how about you? Your favorite animals attack horror film?
It's a good question. I guess the obvious one would be Jaws.
Yeah,
it's like an ultimate monster movie, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna have to think on that one.
I will say I do think Jaws is the rare movie where I think the movie's a lot better than the book.
Oh, fuck yeah. I mean, I laugh at the idea that the book is like, it just drowns, right? They have a chain.
I was listening to the audiobook. I actually rewound it. I was like, I had to miss something.
Did the shark just die? He just died.
Not
like, I'm tired. Book, sorry, folks, if anybody didn't know that.
I was just the end of the book.
There were only 20 sequels, so maybe shark didn't die. But that cracks me up. That book was so bad. I don't know if you saw the documentary about Brian De Palma, but he talks about how he's like, boy, that's cinematic. He's like, when he changes away from books, and he goes, they give me Carrie, and I'm reading this book, and it's so fucking awesome. And then at the end, Mom has a heart attack. She stops her. Boy, that's cinematic. So he has to come up with all this stuff. And I just laugh at how he's just fucking so glib about it. He's talking about how he changed Mission Impossible. Like Robert Towne wanted the end to be a bunch of guys in a train car pulling masks off each other. He goes, oh, that's cinematic. Masks, love them. Train tracks, love them. They're fantastic. How about we put a helicopter? Oh, Towne gets mad and walks out. But I think Jaws is one of those. I love that you brought up Jaws, because Jaws to me is like one of the very few perfect horror films. The first 30 minutes is a perfect horror movie, or a perfect movie. I mean, I can't believe if Spielberg didn't do anything else, that would have been an amazing achievement in just doing so much language of film. And even ideas that he had that unfortunately he couldn't shoot. Like he had one where, and you folks being where you are, because you're off the Cape, right?
Yeah. I'm not very far from where it was shot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, boats and everything, where all of a sudden when all those masts start going like this, the storm is coming. And he had a thing that he was trying to do where the shark was going underneath the boats, and that's how you knew that that was there. And I'm like, see, that's thinking cinematically. It's so freaking cool. But Jaws is so great. I like to look at some of the smaller ones. I love the ripoffs of Jaws, like Grizzly. I mean, Grizzly's just fucking astonishing. That scared the hell out of me as a kid, and it's so silly. But it's also one of those things where everybody that was in that was a great character actor, so it just kind of added to it. And I also think it was so insane how Jaws, a PG-rated film, changed the rating system in its own way. How overnight you could have gallons of blood if you were an independent filmmaker. I mean, if you look at Grizzly, there's a moment where Richard Jekyll is killed, and when they look at him, he's so covered in blood and dirt, he looks like a candy apple with peanuts on it. It's like, my God, you couldn't do this just 3 years ago. But of course, everybody's like, well, buckets of blood, we can get away with it because Jaws did. And that kind of stayed the course until, well, Temple of Doom really screwed him up. But I think the thing was where everybody went, oh, okay, I think we're done with this crazy gore shit. And people stayed away in droves, except for folks like me and everybody that had Fangoria.
It's weird, that movie. I mean, I've always loved it, but it is considered a classic now. But at the time, like, it wasn't well received by really anybody.
No, my dad, he he erased it from his mind. So it was supposed to be like this bonding with me and my dad. He's going to give me the new movie version of the movie that he had as a child, the 1951 version. And Carpenter at the time was kind of considered like this bridge director. He wasn't really cutting edge gross. He was enough of an old school kind of guy. He looked like Howard Hawks stuff. He kind of had that Western motif. And my dad respected that he kind of had restrained stuff, even with The Fog and Escape from New York and stuff. He was like, this reminds me a little bit of old films. But I loved that it was kind of edgy. And so my dad thought, this guy knows how to make monster movies. This is going to be a great movie. And he had seen, in Halloween, they're watching it on TV, the kids. And so, he's like, he loves Halloween, or he loves The Thing. This is going to be so great. So my dad had in his mind what The Thing would be like. Maybe color a little scarier, but not much scarier. And he had no clue that Carpenter was going to do what Hawks was doing. Hawks commented on the Red Scare. He's talking about the other and the Russians. And so you have this monster that the military has to come together, and they do. And only one idiot scientist gets in the way, but everybody comes together like them. If you watch them, everybody works together like, holy shit, giant atomic ants. It's a no-brainer. Everybody would stop them from getting to LA. But then you have the new time, the 80s, and Carpenter was prescient. He realized that we had crossed over at some point. I think it really was Watergate. Once everybody could say the president's a crook, but once he's actually called one and it's proven, that changes the fabric of the country and how people feel, and a cynicism, whatever you may call it. And so Carpenter was commenting on that. Nobody gets along. Nobody trusts anybody anymore. And so my dad's watching this, but buckets of blood. And it was so funny when I went to see it first day with my dad, there were so many father-son teams that were there. It was like, come on, boy, we're going to take you to see this movie. It's going to be an instant classic. And the dads were mad. I thought if there was ever like a con film thing where you hear that they tear up the seats and stuff, I thought it was going to be there at the Wyoming Valley Mall, because the dads were so angry. And then afterwards, my dad was like, it was as if we walked into weird porn or something. We never speak of this again. This movie shall never be uttered. But I was like, it was like a car crash. I was in shock. When Norris on the head rolls down the table, in complete shock.
Yeah, It's weird. When I was a kid, I loved it because of all that stuff, and I still love it today because of that stuff. But it's also, I see that it's also a great movie. It's so well acted. Everything kind of perfect. There's no real negative to the movie to me.
Yeah.
No, I think it's amazing. I think it is. I think that's something. I read a BFI book many years ago in the 90s. They did a BFI about Carpenter because Carpenter was still respected outside of the United States. In the United States, he was kind of a shemp. They didn't like him at all. And so they did this whole retrospective. They're interviewing him, and they were saying how Carpenter was bored through the interview until they mentioned The Thing, and then he leans forward because it's his favorite. It's the movie that he thought was his best movie. It's the one that he put his all into. He had everything that he needed. It was more expensive. That movie was more expensive than E.T. and Poltergeist of the same year.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you think about how big of a failure it was. It was a tremendous failure. We hear a $20 million movie. We don't think anything of that now. But Poltergeist and E.T. were $12 and $15 million respectively. And they made big bank. So he was fucked right then and there. But he was fascinated by what killed him. He really leaned into the conversation because he had the fans hate him. It wasn't just the critics. It wasn't just the dads. It was like Starlog magazine went out of its way to tell him what a scumbucket he was. Here's what he should be directing more: traffic, car accidents. They made jokes about it because they thought it was just pure trash. It was an insult. And I think that's what happens sometimes with great movies, risky movies, especially remakes, because remakes come with a cachet. You're making them because of name recognition and branding for the most part, but you may want to inspire people to see the old one and bring the nugget of something that was great that wasn't in a great movie. Like Cronenberg's The Fly is a great example. The original Fly is like a police procedural. It's a detective show with a big bug. But the new one is astonishing. So you can take an idea that's kind of trapped in B-movie hell and expand it and make it so great. But you also take a risk. He didn't go after the Incredible Two-Headed Transplant or The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. He went after a movie that was the revered film. That and Forbidden Planet and Day the Earth Stood Still were the 50s movies that were like, these are prestige films. These are movies that we write millions of books, and Forey Ackerman goes along and does all this stuff because they inspire a generation to look at metaphor and allegory. And he does this thing that feels like a total slap in the face to it. And so it's an interesting thing. It's there's a lot going on with what happened to The Thing, because there's a lot going on with the United States at the time and what was happening in England as well. We had a big change where we were like, we'll give you sex. You can have the sex comedies, but nobody's going to say anything bad about the government anymore, right? And that was pretty much it.
Yeah. Now, Trista, do you need to go? Because I know you had something going on at 5, or you good for just a couple more minutes?
I'm good for a couple minutes. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all good. I didn't want to, get anyone late for anything, but we can always do part 2. But before that, I do want to ask one thing before we wrap up, though, is what is the next thing?
Oh, great.
All these different things, movies of the time. What post-COVID, what do you think the next trend is?
Ooh, what a great question. So it's funny because I'm doing a podcast about this now, an essay, and I'm starting a new book. And one of the things is that everybody was going, oh, you must have just loved all the zombie movies. I'm like, fuck no. All that was right on the nose. What interests me is the movies that talk about what happened to us, what the byproduct was, mentally, spiritually. So I'm looking at movies that talk more like the sadness, this idea that, we may have issues that keep coming because of our lack of belief, something that attacks the limbic system. And you don't even know. There was a movie on the Masters of Horror group, the series, called The Screwfly Solution, that did kind of the same thing, where there's a disease that made love and hate the same thing. So men were killing women nonstop, and it was this disease that was going to end the race, because anytime a man would be even remotely sexually attracted, the limbic system would go right to violence and he'd murder them. It was a terrifying, terrifying idea. I think it was Joe Lansdale's, but it was really, really fantastic. So I'm looking at movies that are saying things like that, like Saint Maud, I thought was great because it's really talking about how we're burnt out and trying to find some kind of spirituality, but at the same time, we can believe completely in something absolute wrong and kill people because of it and never be able to accept that we did the wrong thing. And I really like that Synchronic was set in New Orleans and was talking about how tired first responders were and how drug use went way up. So I expect to see movies that are, I see a couple things. I think bizarro horror is going to become bigger. So things that are almost absurdist, that are funny and horrifying, that really pull away from reality. I think we're going to see a lot of that because reality is so fucking fucked. And I think that it is so crazy right now that the bizarro is starting to become something big. I think we're also going to see, because of streaming and video games and creepypastas, I believe that I am seeing an audience that refuses to let go of the narrative to the creators. They want to find a middle ground somewhere. They want to be part of that DIY thing. So I don't think it'll be like Bandersnatch. I don't think it'll be like Clue, where movies will have different endings. I don't know where it's going to go, but the things that are the most popular right now are things like creepypasta. You bring up creepypasta at a horror convention, people flock to talk to you about the fairy tales that they're inventing and how some of them seem very real. There are different genres inside of creepypasta, but also after 1917, I think role-playing games are changing narrative. 1917 to me is a horror movie, not a war film, and it's an RPG. The entire movie is us watching things that only the character can see. At moments for 5-10 minutes, we're walking backwards. We're seeing the set as it's growing around the characters. And then we don't know anything about the Huns. We don't know anything about World War I more than we knew when we came in. All we know is the one thing: you have to get this note over here. And that movie felt so much like how I felt playing the original Resident Evil. And when you're looking at where narrative is going, there are so many people who have been playing video games together internationally. Things like all of the Silent Hills, Silent Hill PT, the one that never got made, but was with Guillermo del Toro, that whole test thing. There's no plot. You are dropped right into something and the plot builds around you. And I'm starting to see that movies are less about exposition and are moving more towards that. So I'm interested to see where we're going to go. I have no clue, but I think that the next generation of filmmakers is doing really interesting stuff. We just watched we were about to talk about the Sadness, but we ran out of time because I can't stop talking. But
that's better than someone who just says yes or no.
Yeah, that's very true.
But the Sadness sets up this really simple premise through animation, right? We're watching cells divide and stuff, but we never really get a whole bunch of information. We hear radios on and stuff like that. Even the remake of Dawn of the Dead did that, where radios are being turned off and stuff. So we're getting very, very little. We're experiencing more. We're actually, in a way, going towards more pure cinema than we are talking about exposition. What that's going to look like, though, I have no idea, but I'm excited about it because I'm seeing more people going towards foreign films because of the pandemic. I see the streaming is allowing more tributaries into the Nile. There's something for everyone. And I think unconsciously, whether Mr. and Mrs. America want to admit it, they're allowing the expansion of the definition of horror past their grasp. And it's becoming something that I think is more universal, something that is more accepted. Some of us have to stop being gatekeepers because our baby is now going out there and getting spanked by everybody. But at the same point, I think there's more benefits that can come from it. And I have no clue. I know that if all I have to do is watch The Exorcist, I can see how narrative has changed radically from when I was a child to when I was an adult to where I am now. So narrative is always changing and being, how could we assume that the phones, the games, all of that stuff would not affect cinema when cinema has always been taking in every art form that there is to absorb and create itself? I mean, literally, movies You need every other art form: painting, acting, costumes, lighting. All of that has to happen. Science, physics, all that has to be for a movie to be made. And so, of course, as the technology changes, our mindset is going to change. And, you know, maybe I'll be lost watching new movies, or maybe I won't. That's why I actually did the thing that you hear in memes. I got a couple mentors that are under 30 because I realized I could spend all day talking about the same 11 fucking movies, and I'm missing an entire world.
I appreciate that. I do both the horror movie and I do a wrestling thing, and there's crowds that are the same way. Is they only want to watch old wrestling from the 80s they grew up with. And there's people that don't want to watch any new stuff, but I would. I mean, I love watching old stuff too, but I love watching new stuff.
I may have to ask if you want to be interviewed for a little piece of the book, because I'm looking at all these little facets, and horror has invaded wrestling big time. They're horror movies. They're horror movies, and then all of a sudden there's a ring. And I'm like, what is happening here? So the idea of horror being this thing where, you know, we're looking at the superheroes, and I think the superheroes definitely help horror because they have allowed the pop art and the fine art line to disappear. When you start talking about Endgame, like people talk about Godfather 2, you know there's a change. There's a sea change that happens, that we are allowing myth to be part of our movies again. That you know, these Thor is Thor, but so Iron Man
kind of like Apollo. The creepypasta. I think those are both our legends of today. Like people use the whole stories now. People read comic books and read stuff on the creepypasta on the internet.
Yeah, I think it's great. Who knows what the side effects might be? Like I say, the geeks have finally inherited the earth. More's the pity.
Yeah, I grew up watching Basket Case and playing Dungeons and Dragons and Chess Club, and it was not the coolest kid in the world, but today it would be cool.
Yeah, I love how many times I'm hearing Basket Case. I hope Frank Henenlotter is smiling.
One of my favorites. Yes.
Yeah. It's when I was on a panel at the Stoker thing, and they were asking about different movies, and one of these guys brought up Basket Case, and we talked about Basket Case for like 5 minutes. It's like, yes, Basket Case.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing movie.
Yeah. All these movies, they're amazing films. I love talking about movies that cost less than a used car. And they have so much endurance, and it's really the passion of the people who are involved, the imagination having to do that because you've got so little, and the dedication. I mean, we're not talking about Texas Chainsaw if we don't have Marilyn Burns being able to deal with what she dealt with, or not deal with what she dealt with.
I think it's maybe the best scream queen. You really believe her that she's really gone through into the depth of madness.
Oh man, and I think they did. 112-degree weather with stinking, burning bones and stuff. Oh, I can't even think about what that was like. The theater of cruelty. That's the cinema of cruelty. That thing, and I think it's one of the best. I usually ask on my show what your first kiss was. What's the first kiss with horror? What's the thing that freaked you out? So can you guys give me the gift of your first kisses?
I've said this many times, but the first one I remember is actually going to see Night of the Living Dead at the drive-in with my older brother here and our mom. She'd take me. Troy was probably, 13 or 14. And so I was probably like 5 or something. And but anyway, I remember it was in the drive-in, and I remember that I got upset when the truck blows up and they start eating everybody. And and our mom told me it's okay. They're just having a barbecue, and then I was all right with it.
Oh, I love your mom for saying that. That's so.
And I want to also add the old comic books not comic books, the old magazines Troy would read, like you mentioned, Eerie and Fangoria and all those. And two visuals from those that always stood out to me was Farmer Vincent and Martin. And they scared me just the pictures of them. And so when we first got a VCR and we went to Curtis Mathis, I remember the store, to rent our first movies, I told my mom I need to see Motel Hell because I wanted to see the pig head with the chainsaw.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably the most iconic cover. I mean, out of all of the Fangorias, because that was like, okay, people have been complaining. Let's just put this chainsawing pig head on the front cover with blood all around the chainsaw. I mean, there's no subtlety whatsoever in that. I remember Phantasm. the open page, the 2-page spread where it's just a ball in the head.
Yep.
And that was like the first thing I'd ever seen in a magazine like that. I think it was like Fangoria 2. And it just was like, okay, I need to know everything about this movie. I cannot believe that they have a magazine where they're showing a ball drilling into somebody's head. How about you, Troy?
I think mine, probably like on Creature double feature, watching like The Wolf Man. I think it would be one of the old Universal ones anyway. Either The Wolf Man or Bride of Frankenstein, something like that. And then I was hooked. I just needed more.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Wolfman because, you know, the Universal ones, I got a little bit scared of Frankenstein, but I empathized with them. I kind of felt like
all of those.
Yeah. Dracula was kind of sexy in a weird way and creepy like an uncle. But the one that was scary was the Wolfman. Just completely unfettered rage, child rage, right? And you can see now how you might have been looking at what was going to happen to you when the hormones started to change. But man, that was so scary. It was like my dad had a temper. So every time I saw the Wolfman, it was like, whoa, that's really, you know, hitting me here. And but my favorite now is Ginger Snaps. After I saw Ginger Snaps, I was like, how could I have ever not seen this as a woman? It's like, even though I love Lyle Talbot, it's like everything about that just lines up. The whole idea of the outsider and the idea of not being able to speak up and being monstrous when you do is just fucking amazing. But yeah, but I love me some Wolfman.
Yeah, I still do.
Yeah. Trista?
Oh, mine was Child's Play.
Oh.
I'm a Chucky girl.
Oh,
nothing wrong with that.
No, that's hot. I mean, that's one of those that I hear a lot, you know. So there's a few. Alien gets said a lot. Motel Hell, weirdly enough, gets in there every so often because of that magazine. But the Chucky one I hear a whole lot because, you know, that uncanny valley thing, and everybody had dolls. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people had dolls and action figures. I remember my dad getting mad at me because I wanted a G.I. Joe. He's like, you're not playing with dolls. I said, it's an action figure. It's a doll. You know, that old school thing of my father. But the idea of like my sister's dolls creeped me out. You know, I could be in the room if the door closed because of the wind. I'd be like, oh. And so Chucky's
that's one of the few things that actually freaked me out in movies as a kid because I had so many action figures. Is anytime there was like even in Poltergeist, like just the little doll they have, because I had a bunch of things in my room like that.
Right. Chucky had one of the greatest jump scares, the original film, the original Child's Play, when she's holding. Oh dear. I thought you were bringing up the doll. I'm like, here we go. This is a nightmare. But when Brad Dourif goes, you bet. Oh man, I jumped so far because they just played it so well. Just kept, you know, all that business, moving the doll around and just keeping the camera still on them. Man, that was a great jump.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and we have to do it again. We'll do
part two. Gotta get the part two.
I think you're a perfect fit for everyone here. So,
thanks so much. This is fun. This is what I love
for setting it up.
Yes, thank you.
Guest for the show. So, where can people follow you to see what you're up to?
Well, if you're looking for what's going on with me, hellbentforhorror.com is a great starting place. You can find out about the books. You can find out about the podcast. You can listen to the podcast there. The podcast is on everything. It's Spotify, et cetera, anywhere that you have, where you listen to your podcast, you'll be able to find Hellbent for Horror. If you're looking for something on, you know, the creaky old Facebook, I'm Hellbent for Horror here. Also Twitter, Hellbent Horror, and the same with Instagram, Hellbent for Horror. And I have another book that I'm working on right now, and it's really about how this is DIY punk rock world horror, why we love it, and why I want more people doing it, and why I want new stories, and how we can maybe look at new avenues and find those stories told in a different way that'll excite us, and really also own up that we do like jump scares. We hate lazy ones.
There we go. I like that.
I agree. Yeah. So check out Screaming for Pleasure. I really enjoyed the book, not just because you're here. And
thanks so much.
Yeah, and check out the one you mentioned. We'll have the link up. where people
Shattered and Splintered, it's called.
And also, we're not associated with it, but check out The Sadness. It's a great movie. It's better, and you can get the special edition Blu-ray from Raven Banner.
Yeah, boy, I could go on and on about some great horror films that are happening now. Part 2, we'll just have to go there.
All right, next time.
Yeah, all right. But and it's really crazy. The Sadness is that guy's first movie.
I know.
That's
I was
crazy.
like, holy cow! I mean, talk about eating cinema, seeing stuff and going, I know exactly what energy. That last shot.
Oh, my mind. Yep.
Yeah. Great movie. Really enjoy it. All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.